The great hall of the Galactic Council stretched for miles in every direction, and its ceiling rose so high that clouds sometimes formed beneath the glass dome that protected it from the void of Space Ambassador Elena Vasquez had walked these halls for 15 years. And in all that time, she had never once raised her voice above a whisper. Today would be different. She sat in the single chair reserved for humanity at the far edge of the assembly floor, surrounded by empty space that the other species refused to fill. And she watched as the representatives of 1,000 worlds conducted business as if she did not exist. The Cathra delegation occupied the center of the hall, their massive armored bodies gleaming under the artificial lights. And their leader, High Commander Desok, was speaking in that grinding metallic voice that made human ears ache. Resolution 7742 is simple, he declared, his forearms spreading wide in a gesture of false generosity. The human colonies on Kepler-22b, Tratus 7, and New Eden are vulnerable to pirate attacks and cosmic threats, and the Kethra Dominion offers its protection through immediate annexation. Laughter rippled through the assembly, a sound made up of clicks and whistles and rumbles from dozens of alien throats. Selena felt the weight of those sounds pressing against her chest, but she did not move, and she did not look away. To her left, the Velith ambassador, a being of pure light contained within a crystalline shell, pulsed with amusement, and its psychic emanations washed over the room like waves of contempt. The humans cannot even defend their own borders, the Velith sang, its voice echoing directly in the minds of all present. Perhaps this is a mercy? More laughter. High Arbiter Zolveth, the ancient creature who had presided over this council for 3,000 years, raised one of his withered appendages, and the room fell silent. The resolution is noted, he said, his voice like wind through dead leaves. Does any delegation wish to speak against it? Silent Elena looked around the vast chamber at the representatives of species who had conquered stars before humanity had learned to use fire, and she saw the same expression on every alien face: dismissal, boredom, and the absolute certainty that nothing she could say would matter. For 200 years, humanity had endured this. They had accepted the single seat at the far edge of the room, and they had smiled politely when the elder races made jokes about human fragility, and they had nodded respectfully when their concerns were ignored, and they had never, not once, demanded anything more the other. Species had drawn their own conclusions from this behavior. They believed humans were cowards. They believed humans were weak. They believed humans had accepted their place at the bottom of the galactic hierarchy and would never challenge it. They were wrong. Elena rose from her chair, and the movement was so unexpected that several nearby delegates actually flinched. The human delegation wishes to speak, she said, and her voice carried across the vast chamber with a clarity that surprised even our High Arbiter Zolveth's ancient eyes focused on her with something that might have been curiosity, and he made a gesture with one gnarled hand. The human may speak, he said, and more laughter followed his words. This should be amusing. Elena walked toward the center of the assembly floor, her footsteps echoing in the sudden silence, and she felt the weight of 10,000 alien eyes pressing against her. Kethra Commander Desok loomed over her as she approached, his armored form more than 3 times her height, and his mandibles clicked with anticipation. Little human, he rumbled, do you wish to beg for mercy? I might grant your species a reservation on one of your moons if you kneel before the feigned Dominion. Now, Elena stopped walking and looked up at him, and something in her expression made his mandibles stop clicking. 200 years, she said, and her voice was calm, almost conversational. For 200 years, humanity has sat in that chair at the edge of this room, and we have watched, and we have listened, and we have learned. She paused and looked around the chamber at the assembled delegates. You saw our silence and thought it was submission. She continued. You saw our patience and thought it was weakness. And you saw our willingness to accept insults and assumed we had no pride. The Veloth ambassador's crystalline form flickered with confusion, and its psychic emanations shifted from contempt to uncertainty. You measured us by your own standards, Elena said. You looked at our soft bodies and saw prey. And you looked at our short lifespans and saw insignificance. And you looked at our lack of natural weapons and saw helplessness. She smiled. And it was not a friendly expression. But you never asked yourselves how a species so weak could have survived on a world that tried to kill us every single day. And you never wondered how creatures so fragile could have clawed their way from mud huts to starships in less than 10,000 years. And you never considered what kind of strength it takes to endure what we have endured. High Arbiter Zolvith leaned forward, and for the first time in centuries, genuine interest flickered in his ancient eyes. What are you saying, human? Elena turned to face him directly. I'm saying that you have made a mistake, she said. All of you, every species in this chamber. You have looked at humanity and seen what you wanted to see. And you have told yourselves comfortable lies about our nature. And you have never once considered the possibility that we were not what we appeared to be. She reached into her jacket and withdrew a small data crystal, and she held it up so that the light caught its facets. This contains information that humanity has gathered over the past 200 years, she said. Intelligence on every major power in this galaxy. Secrets that some of you have killed to protect. And truths that would shake the foundations of this council if they were revealed. The laughter had stopped completely now, and Elena could feel the tension building in the room like static before a storm. You thought we were harmless, she said. You thought we were too weak to threaten anyone, and so you let us move freely through your societies. And you shared your technology with us without concern. And you spoke openly in front of human observers because you believed we could never use what we learned. She pressed a button on the crystal, and holographic displays flickered to life throughout the chamber, showing classified military positions and secret communications and evidence of crimes that had been hidden for millennia. We remember everything, Elena said, and her voice rang through the hall like a bell. We learned everything, and now, finally, we are ready to speak. The universe had thought humanity was weak. The universe was about to learn just how wrong it had been. The holographic displays floating through the council chamber showed 200 years of secrets. And as the assembled delegates watched in growing horror, the story of humanity's silent observation began to unfold it, and started on the very first day of contact when the Veloth scout ship descended through Earth's atmosphere in the year 2087. Humanity had greeted them with open arms and nervous smiles, and the psychic beings had looked into human minds and seen only wonder and fear and hope. They had not seen the small group of scientists in an underground bunker 3,000 miles away who were already recording every signal the alien ship produced, the Arcera. Chun had led that first team, and she had understood something that would guide humanity for generations to come. The galaxy expected humans to be overwhelmed by first contact, and as long as humans played that role, no one would look too closely at what they were actually doing within a week. Her team had decoded the basic structure of Veloth communication protocols, and within a month, they had identified 17 distinct frequencies the aliens used for different purposes, and within a year, they had built the first prototype of a device that could detect Veloth psychic emanations without being noticed. The Veloth never knew when humanity joined the galactic community. They sent ambassadors who smiled and nodded and asked simple questions. And they sent scientists who fumbled with alien equipment and made predictable mistakes. And they sent students who struggled in alien academies and graduated at the bottom of their classes. Behind this mask of mediocrity, something else was happening. Dr. Yusuf Okonkwo spent 40 years at the Architect Academy of Higher Mathematics, and his instructors considered him a pleasant but unremarkable student who would never truly grasp the complexities of slipspace engineering. They did not know that every night, alone in his quarters, Yusuf reviewed the day's lessons and compared them against the work of human mathematicians who had never seen an alien equation in his 37th year at the academy. He found that the architects had been using a flawed constant in their slipspace calculations for over 10,000 years. A tiny error that limited the efficiency of their engines by nearly 15%. And they had never noticed because no one had thought to question. Mathematics that had worked for millennia. Yusuf did not tell them instead. He sent his findings back to Earth through channels that the galactic community did not know existed. And human engineers began quietly incorporating corrected calculations into their own ship designs. The same pattern repeated across every field of knowledge. Commander Wei Lin trained at military academies on 7 different worlds, and she learned the combat techniques of 11 warrior species. And she studied their tactics and strategies and philosophies of war. Her instructors saw a dedicated but average student who would never match the natural abilities of their own warriors. They did not see the woman who spent her nights analyzing the weaknesses inherent in every fighting style she had learned. And they did not know that she was developing a new system of combat that combined the strengths of multiple traditions while eliminating their individual flaws. She called an adaptive response. And she taught it to a small group of human soldiers who would one day become the most effective fighting force the galaxy had ever seen. Engineer Priya Sharma worked in a Kethra shipyard for 12 years, and she was considered a competent but unimaginative worker who followed instructions without questioning reality. She was memorizing the exact specifications of every weapon system, every shield generator, and every structural weakness in Kethra warship design. She documented the precise harmonic frequency at which Kethra hull alloys became brittle, and she calculated the exact timing needed to bypass their point defense systems. And she identified the blind spots in their sensor arrays that could allow a smaller ship to approach undetected. All of this information flowed back to Earth. The galactic community shared technology freely with humans because they believed the weak species could never pose a threat, and in their arrogance, they gave humanity the keys to their own destruction. But it was not just technology that humans studied. Ambassador James Oduya spent 30 years building relationships with delegates from every major power in the galaxy, and he was known as a friendly but ineffective diplomat who could never quite achieve anything meaningful for his species. What the galaxy did not know was that James had a perfect memory for conversation, and over 3 decades, he cataloged every lie, every secret deal, and every hidden alliance that was discussed in his presence. He recorded the private communications of the Kethra Military Council, and he documented the Velith experiments on unwilling subjects, and he tracked the architect manipulation of galactic trade routes for their own benefit. 6 different species approached humanity during this time with offers of secret alliances, and each one promised protection in exchange for intelligence on the others. James smiled and nodded and said he would consider their offers. And then he documented everything they had said and added it to the growing archive of galactic secrets. Humanity refused every alliance, not because they were too weak to be useful partners, but because they had a different plan, one that required patience and secrecy, and an absolute refusal to take sides in the petty conflicts of the elder races. The information gathering was only part of it on Earth and on the human colony worlds. A transformation was taking place. Engineers used stolen technology and corrected mathematics to build ships that should have been impossible. Vessels that could outrun Velith cruisers and outgun Kethra battleships and outthink Architect command system scientists developed weapons calibrated to the specific weaknesses of alien species, countermeasures against psychic intrusion, and shields that adapted to incoming fire in real-time. Soldiers trained in academies hidden beneath the surface of a dozen moons, learning combat techniques that combined the best of 11 warrior traditions with human innovation and ruthless efficiency. All of this happened in secret, hidden behind the mask of weakness that humanity had worn for 2 centuries. The galactic community thought they knew everything about their human neighbors. They knew nothing, and now, as Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood in the center of the Galactic Council chamber, with holographic evidence floating around her like stars, the truth was finally coming out. High Arbiter Zolveth stared at the displays with eyes that had seen the rise and fall of 1,000 civilizations, and for the first time in 3,000 years, he felt something he had almost forgotten: fear. How was this possible? The Kethra commander Thezok demanded, his armored form trembling with rage. How could humans have gathered this information without our knowledge? Elena smiled, and there was no warmth in it. You invited us into your homes, she said. You let us work in your factories and study in your academies and serve on your ships. And you never once considered that we might be paying attention. She gestured at the holographic displays. Every secret conversation conducted in front of a human servant. Every classified document left visible to a human janitor. Every restricted area accessed by a human maintenance worker. We remembered all of it. The chamber erupted in chaos as delegates shouted accusations and demanded explanations. And Elena stood at the center of the storm like a stone in a river. Unmoved and unafraid, 200 years of patience had led to this moment. Humanity had finally found its voice, and the galaxy would never be the same. The chaos in the council chamber continued for several minutes, before High Arbiter Zolveth raised his withered hand and released a pulse of energy that silenced every voice in the room. 3,000 years of leadership. He had never needed to use that power, Ambassador Vasquez, he said, and his voice carried a weight that made the air itself seem heavy. You will explain yourself. Elena nodded once and turned to face the assembled delegates. For 2 centuries, the species of this council have treated humanity as a curiosity at best and a nuisance at worst, she said. You have divided our territory without consulting us. You have excluded us from meaningful decisions, and you have made plans for our eventual extinction. The Kethra commander Thezok started to protest, but Elena silenced him with a gesture toward one of the floating holographic displays. 3 years ago, High Commander, you sent a private communication to the Kethra Military Council outlining your proposal for what you called the human solution. She said, you suggested that once Resolution 7742 passed, your forces would systematically reduce human population centers until we were no longer viable as a species. The display shifted to show the exact text of the communication, complete with the Sock's personal authentication codes. The massive warrior went very still. That communication was encrypted with Kethra military protocols, he said slowly. Protocols that no other species has ever broken. We broke them 12 years ago, Elena replied calmly. We have been reading your military communications ever since. She turned to the Volith ambassador, whose crystalline form had dimmed to a pale flicker. And you, Ambassador Selveth, have been conducting unauthorized experiments on species that your people consider lesser beings for the past 800 years. Another display activated, showing records of Velith research facilities hidden in the dark spaces between stars. 17 million subjects over 8 centuries. Elena continued, most of them from species too weak to complain, including 237 humans who disappeared from colony worlds over the past century. The Velith ambassador made a sound like breaking glass. Those records were protected by psychic locks, it said. No non-psychic species should be able to access them. We found a way, Elena said simply. She moved through the chamber. And with each step, she activated another display, revealing another secret. The architects had been manipulating galactic trade routes for millennia, ensuring that their own species profited while others struggled. The Lesser Collective had secretly funded pirate operations in human space. Hoping to weaken humanity enough to justify annexation, the Corvin Assembly had conducted biological research on captured enemy soldiers, developing diseases that could wipe out entire populations. Every major power in the galaxy had secrets they believed were safe. And Elena exposed them all. You thought we were blind, she said. You thought we were deaf. And you thought we were too simple to understand what was happening around us. She stopped in the center of the chamber and faced High Arbiter Zolveth directly. We understood everything. The ancient arbiter studied her with eyes that had seen empires rise and fall. And something shifted in his expression, a grudging respect that had not been there before. What do you want, Ambassador Vasquez? He asked. You have shown us that humanity is not what we believed. But revelation without purpose is merely chaos, Elena smiled. And this time, there was genuine warmth in it. We want what every species in this chamber wants, she said. We want to survive, we want to grow, and we want to be treated with the respect we have earned. She raised her hand, and all the holographic displays vanished except one, a simple image of the human delegation chair sitting alone at the edge of the assembly floor. For 200 years, we accepted that chair because we were not ready to demand more, she said. We accepted insults and dismissal because we needed time to learn. And we accepted our position at the bottom of the galactic hierarchy because it served our purposes. The image changed, showing 3 chairs where one had been. That time is over. Commander Vezok surged forward, his massive form looming over Elena like a mountain of armor and rage. You think secrets give you power? He snarled. The Kethra Dominion has crushed species far stronger than humanity, and we will not be threatened by soft creatures who hide behind stolen information. Elena did not step back. You misunderstand me. High Commander, she said. I am not threatening you. I am offering you a choice. She reached into her jacket and withdrew a second data crystal, this one glowing with a soft blue light. This crystal contains evidence of crimes committed by every major power in this chamber, she said. Crimes against humanity, crimes against other species, and crimes against the principles this council claims to uphold. She held the crystal up so that everyone could see it. I can release this information to every news service in the galaxy right now, she continued. I can expose every lie, every secret deal, and every hidden atrocity, and I can watch as your alliances crumble and your populations demand accountability. The chamber went absolutely silent. Or, Elena said, we can begin again. She lowered the crystal and looked around at the assembled delegates. Humanity does not want war, she said. We do not want revenge, and we do not want to destroy the galactic order that has kept the peace for millennia. Her voice softened, and for a moment she sounded almost tired. We have spent 200 years preparing for this moment, not because we wanted to threaten or intimidate, but because we knew that the only way to earn respect in this galaxy was to show that we could not be ignored. She turned back to High Arbiter Zolveth. We want a seat at the table, she said. A real seat with a real voice, and the right to participate in decisions that affect our species. The ancient arbiter was silent for a long moment. And if we refuse? Elena's expression did not change. Then the information on this crystal goes public within the hour. And every species in this chamber will spend the next century dealing with the consequences. She paused. I do not think any of you want that. High Commander Thesok looked ready to attack. But something held him back, perhaps the knowledge that his secrets were now in human hands. Perhaps the realization that humanity was no longer the easy prey he had expected. High Arbiter Zelveth looked around the chamber at the frightened, angry faces of delegates who had ruled the galaxy unchallenged for millennia. "It seems," he said slowly, "that we have underestimated humanity." Elena nodded. "Yes," she said. "You have." She placed the data crystal back in her jacket. "The choice is yours, High Arbiter. But I suggest you make it quickly. There are many in my government who believe that exposure is the only path forward, and I cannot hold them back forever." The ancient arbiter closed his eyes for a moment, and when he opened them again, something had changed. "3 seats," he said quietly. "Humanity will have 3 seats on this council, effective immediately." Elena bowed her head in acknowledgement. "That is acceptable," she said. For now, she turned and walked back toward the human section of the chamber. As she did, she could feel the weight of 1,000 alien eyes on her back. The galaxy had learned something today. Humanity was no longer the weakest species in the room. High Commander the SOC refused to accept defeat 3 days after Ambassador Vasquez's speech at the Galactic Council. His fleet crossed the border into human space, and 400 warships moved toward the colony world of New Eden like a storm of metal and fire. The Kethra Dominion had conquered hundreds of species over its long history, and Desok had personally overseen the destruction of 17 civilizations that had dared to challenge. His people, humans, would be no different. "They have words and secrets," he told his commanders. "We have weapons and warriors, and we will show the galaxy that humanity's little display changes nothing." His flagship, the Devourer of Worlds, led the formation, a massive vessel 3 kilometers long, bristling with weapons that could crack a planet's crust with a single shot. Behind it came battleships and cruisers and destroyers, enough firepower to burn a dozen colonies to ash. The Kethra High Council had not authorized this attack, but Desok knew they would forgive him once humanity was broken, and he knew the other species would remember that. Secrets meant nothing against raw military power. He expected to find human colonies defended by a handful of outdated ships crewed by frightened civilians. He found the Defiance Admiral Marcus Stone stood on the bridge of the carrier unbroken, watching the approaching Kethra fleet on the tactical display, and he felt a calm settle over him that he had not experienced since his days as a young pilot. 37 ships, that was all humanity had sent to defend New Eden. The Indomitable and his sister carriers formed the core of the formation, surrounded by cruisers with names like Perseverance and Resolution and Hope, and flanking them were destroyers too small to have names at all. 37 ships against 400. The odds should have been laughable. Stone opened a communication channel. "Kethra Fleet, this is Admiral Marcus Stone of the Human Defense Force," he said, and his voice was steady and calm. "You have entered human space without authorization, and you will withdraw immediately or face the consequences." Desok's response came as a roar of contempt. "Human, I have crushed species that commanded thousands of ships, and you think 37 vessels can stop me?" His mandibles clicked in what passed for Kethra laughter. "Stand aside or be destroyed." Stone cut the channel and looked at his tactical officer. "All ships, initiate pattern cascade." The human fleet began to move. Kethra tactical systems were designed to predict enemy movements based on known military doctrines, and they had centuries of data on how different species fought. They had no data on humans. Pattern cascade was not a formation or a strategy. It was a philosophy of combat developed by Commander Wei Lin, and it operated on a single principle. The best tactic is the one your enemy has never seen before. Human ships scattered in what appeared to be random directions, breaking every rule of fleet combat. And Kethra targeting systems struggled to track vessels that refused to behave predictably. Desok snarled in frustration. "They run like frightened animals," he said. "All ships, pursue and destroy." the Kethra fleet spread out to chase the fleeing human vessels. And in doing so, they made exactly the mistake Stone had expected. The first wave of human missiles launched from angles that Kethra sensors were not designed to detect. Weapons fired from positions that no sane military doctrine would recommend. They struck with terrible precision. Each missile carried a warhead calibrated to the exact harmonic frequency that engineer Priya Sharma had identified years ago. The frequency at which Kethra hull alloys became brittle, and when they hit, they did not explode. They resonate Kethra armor that had withstood direct hits from weapons of a dozen species cracked and shattered like glass. And the ships beneath that armor were suddenly vulnerable in ways they had never been. Before 37 Kethra vessels died in the first 30 seconds, Thesok watched in disbelief as his fleet began to come apart. How is this possible? He demanded. Their weapons should not be able to penetrate our armor. His tactical officers had no answer. Human ships were no longer running. They were circling back, moving through the gaps in the Kethra formation with an agility that seemed impossible. And they were firing constantly. Human pilots had trained for years in simulators designed to replicate this exact scenario. And they knew exactly where every Kethra blind spot was. Exactly how long it took for Kethra point defense systems to track a new target. And exactly which components to hit to disable a warship without destroying it. They did not fight like any species the Kethra had ever encountered. They fought like humans, adaptable, unpredictable, and absolutely relentless. Stone's voice came over the fleet channel. All ships, initiate pattern Tempest. The human fleet shifted again, moving into a new configuration that the Kethra systems interpreted as a defensive formation. And Thesok seized the opportunity. All ships, concentrate fire on their center, he ordered. Break their formation. 300 Kethra warships turned their weapons on the human cruiser Resolution, which sat alone at the apparent center of the human fleet. They fired and Resolution vanished. The ship had been projecting a holographic image of itself from 10,000 kilometers away. A trick that Kethra technology should have detected instantly. It did not. The real Resolution emerged from behind a cluster of debris from destroyed Kethra ships and fired a single torpedo directly into the engine section of the Devourer of Worlds. The flagship shuddered as its primary drive went offline. Thesok felt something he had not experienced in 400 years of warfare. He felt fear. The battle lasted 11 minutes. When it was over, 340 Kethra vessels drifted dead or disabled in space, and the remaining 60 had surrendered. After watching their flagship fall, human losses were 7 ships destroyed and 12 damaged. The galaxy had never seen anything like it. Admiral Stone stood on the bridge of the Unbroken and watched as boarding parties secured the Devourer of Worlds, and he allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Admiral, his communications officer said, "We have secured High Commander Thesok. He is alive and in custody." Stone nodded. That had been the plan from the beginning, not to destroy the Kethra commander, but to capture him, to show the galaxy that humanity could choose mercy even in victory. "Patch me through to the Galactic Council broadcast network." He sighed a moment later. His face appeared on screens across 1,000 worlds. "This is Admiral Marcus Stone of the Human Defense Force," he said. "Approximately 1 hour ago, a Kethra fleet entered human space without authorization and attempted to attack our colony of New Eden." He paused. "That fleet has been neutralized, and High Commander Thesok is now in human custody." He looked directly into the camera. "Humanity did not seek this conflict, and we take no pleasure in the lives lost today. But we will not be conquered, and we will not be threatened, and we will not accept aggression against our people." His expression hardened to the governments of the galaxy. "We offer this message. Humanity desires peace and cooperation with all species. But if you threaten our worlds, our people, or our future, we will respond with everything we have." He straightened. "Today, the universe learned that humanity is not weak. We have simply been patient." The broadcast ended across the galaxy. Species that had dismissed humanity as insignificant watched the footage of the battle in stunned silence. And they began to understand that everything they had believed about the weakest species was wrong. The Kethra had learned that lesson firsthand. They would not be the last. 1 year had passed since the Battle of New Eden, and the galaxy was still trying to understand what it meant on the planet Nexus Prime. The Great Hall of the Galactic Council looked much the same as it always had. Miles of polished floor beneath a ceiling that touched the clouds, filled with representatives of 1,000 species conducting the final business of governing the stars. But something fundamental had changed. Human delegation no longer sat at the edge of the room. Ambassador Elena Vasquez occupied one of 3 chairs positioned near the center of the assembly floor, flanked by Admiral Marcus Stone and Dr. Yusuf Okonkwo. And when she raised her hand to speak, the chamber fell silent, not because they found her amusing, because they were afraid of what she might say. High Arbiter Zolveth watched the human delegation with ancient eyes that had seen empires crumble and new powers rise. And he recognized what he was witnessing: the birth of something that would reshape the galaxy for millennia to come. The Kethra domain had surrendered 3 months after the Battle of New Eden, not because their fleet had been destroyed, but because High Commander Thisok had given testimony about Kethra military secrets while in human custody. He had not been tortured or threatened. He had simply been treated with respect and dignity. And somewhere in that experience, his certainty had cracked, and he had begun to question everything he had been taught about the weak species that his people had planned to exterminate. His exterminate testimony had triggered a revolution within the Dominion itself. As younger, Kethra demanded accountability for the crimes their leaders had committed in secret. The Kethra were not the only species in turmoil. The information that Elena had revealed at the council meeting had spread, despite attempts to suppress it, and populations across the galaxy were asking difficult questions about what their governments had done in their names. The Velith Collective faced prosecution for 8 centuries of illegal experimentation. The Architect Consortium was forced to restructure its trade policies after evidence of manipulation became public. The Desser and the Corvin and a dozen other species found themselves dealing with protests and demands for change that they had never anticipated. Humanity had not caused this chaos. They had simply revealed what was already there, hidden beneath the surface of galactic civilization. And they had forced the elder races to confront truths they had preferred to ignore. Some species blamed humanity for the upheaval and called for retaliation. They quickly discovered that threatening humans was no longer as safe as it had once been. The human defense force had grown in the years since New Eden, and ships that incorporated corrected architect mathematics and adapted Kethra weaponry now patrolled the borders of human space. More importantly, humanity had demonstrated something that changed how other species calculated risk. They had shown that they would not start fights, but they would finish them. Delegations arrived on Earth almost daily now, seeking alliances and trade agreements and access to human innovation. And Elena's staff worked constantly to manage the flood of requests. Some of these visitors came with genuine offers of partnership. Others came with threats wrapped in diplomatic language, testing whether humanity's new strength was real or merely a bluff. They all left with the same conclusion: humanity was no longer pretending. Dr. Yusuf Okonkwo had been offered positions at a dozen alien academies since the truth about his mathematical discoveries became known, and he had refused them all. Instead, he had established the Institute for Collaborative Research on the Human Colony World of New Eden, a facility where scientists from any species could work together on problems too complex for any single civilization to solve. The Institute had already produced breakthroughs in medicine, energy production, and environmental restoration, and its work was changing how species throughout the galaxy thought about cooperation. Commander Wei Lin had retired from active military service and now ran a training academy that accepted students from 17 different species, teaching the adaptive combat techniques that had proven so effective against the Kethrism. Of her students were former enemies she treated them all. The same engineer Priya Sharma had returned to the shipyards where she had once worked in secret, but now she led a team of designers from a dozen worlds, creating vessels that combined the best technologies of multiple species. Her first new design, a research vessel called the Unity, had been commissioned by the Galactic Council itself. These individuals represented something larger than themselves. They represented what humanity could become when it was no longer forced to hide in the council chamber. High Arbiter Zolveth called the session to order, and he looked at the human delegation with an expression that held something new: respect, perhaps, or maybe just the recognition that the universe had changed. The council will now hear from the human confederacy regarding their proposal for the establishment of a galactic truth commission, he announced. Lena rose from her chair. 1 year ago, she had stood in this same chamber and revealed secrets that had shaken the foundations of galactic civilization. Today, she would propose something different, not exposure, but healing. Distinguished delegates, she began. 1 year ago, I stood before you and showed you truths that many of you had worked hard to hide. And I watched as those truths caused pain and chaos and conflict throughout the galaxy. She paused and looked around at the assembled faces. That was necessary, but it was not enough. She activated a holographic display that showed images from across the galaxy: protests and peace negotiations, memorial services for victims of hidden crimes, and new governments forming from the ashes of old corruption. The past year has been difficult for many of your species, she continued. You have faced accountability for actions that were never meant to be exposed, and you have struggled to rebuild trust with populations that feel betrayed. Her expression softened. Humanity did not reveal those secrets to punish you. We revealed them because hidden wounds cannot heal, and a civilization built on lies cannot stand. She gestured, and the display changed to show the proposal she had spent months developing. The Galactic Truth Commission will provide a path forward, she said. A way for species to acknowledge past wrongs, to seek reconciliation with those they have harmed, and to build a foundation of honesty that can support a better future. High Arbiter Zolveth leaned forward. You propose that we air our darkest secrets before the entire galaxy, he asked. That seems likely to cause more chaos, not less. Elena shook her head. I propose that we stop pretending that those secrets do not exist, she said. I propose that we choose transparency over concealment, accountability over denial, and healing over festering resentment. She met his ancient eyes directly. Humanity spent 200 years learning the truth about this galaxy, she said. We know how much pain is hidden behind your facades of civilization, and we know that pain will eventually destroy everything if it is not addressed. She spread her hands. We offer you a choice. Continue as you have for millennia, letting old wounds poison every interaction and old lies undermine every alliance, or work with us to build something new. The chamber was silent. Then, slowly, the Velith ambassador raised a crystalline limb. The Velith Collective supports the proposal, it said, and its psychic voice carried a weight of exhaustion and hope. We have much to answer for, and we are tired of carrying that burden in secret. Other hands rose. The Corvin Assembly, the Desser Collective, species that had hidden their crimes for centuries, one by one, They voiced their support, not all of them. Some species would never accept accountability, and some wounds would take generations to heal. But it was a beginning. High Arbiter Zolveth watched the votes accumulate, and when it was clear the proposal would pass, he turned to Elena. "It seems the universe continues to surprise me," he said quietly. "Even after 3,000 years," Elena smiled. "Humanity has spent a long time learning to survive," she said. "Now we want to learn how to live, and we hope you will join us." The ancient arbiter nodded slowly. "Very well," he said, and his voice carried across the chamber. The motion passes. Elena sat down and looked at the 3 human chairs that now occupied a place of honor in the Galactic Assembly. And she thought about how far her species had come 200 years ago. Humanity had been dismissed as the weakest species in the galaxy today. They were helping to lead it toward a better future. The universe had finally learned to listen when humanity spoke, and this was only the beginning.